Hello, and welcome to this week's Eco Show. We're near the beach today, and hopefully it is blocking the wind. So if you're here watching on YouTube, I hope you enjoy the sights. You may see some people on horses, some walkers, but they'll all be a ways in the distance. Okay, so this week we're going to start a little bit different. We're going to start every other week. Well, usually, if you're new to the show, I go through an animal of the week, then some recent science research, and then I am doing the news. And I'm going to mix it up a little bit this week and give a little shout out for what to plant. This will change a lot depending on where you are, and specifics will be different, but it's just a general shout out by hemisphere. I need to learn what the equatorial region planting times are. But for now, we're going to shout out the northern hemisphere first. And it's your last chance for sowing from seed your chilies and tomatoes and aubergines. So if you're in the northern hemisphere and you're wanting to get some tomato crops going with some chilies, now's the time to do it. You can also sow indoors your beets and carrots. And around now would be the time that you'd be harvesting radish, rhubarb, leeks, and kales. So it's kind of the springtime, getting lots of seed sown and harvesting your winter plants. In the southern hemisphere, we're pretty much at the end of the harvest season. So now it's getting your winter plants sown. So cold, hardy salad greens, and you can get a variety of root crops in the ground like carrots, beet, radish, and spring onion. And this is more of the harvest time for like fruits along the lines of apples, apricots, blueberries, grapes, and feijoas. You can also think about planting a green manure over your beds at this time to get them nice and fertilized for growing next year. So that was just our little what to plant shout out. And with that, we'll also give you a plant of the week. And this plant of the week, so usually I do an animal of the week, but we're doing a plant of the week today, and there's a little bit of a hint before, it's the tomato, which is technically the edible berry of a plant called, in Latin, Solanum lycopersicum. And lycopersicum means wolf peach in Latin. The ancestor of tomato plants that we're used to today was the size of a pea, and there's evidence that it was beginning to be cultivated at least by 500 BC, but probably much before then. It's from Western South America, Mexico, and Central America. And the Spanish word tomato or tomato comes from the original word was tomat, and that was from the Nahuatl people. And when I was looking up how to pronounce it, that L is pronounced like a At least that's what the Google pronunciation thing was. And actually, a tomato that we're used to is called tomate. And tomate was more of something that's like the tomatillo. If you've seen that, it's a small green tomato. And tomate means swelling fruit, fat water, fat thing. And this was used in a variety of different recipes and cooking situations. Colonizers in the Aztec areas, in the Aztec kingdoms, they took note of it being used in hot sauces, in juices, shredded meat, different things. So it was used for a huge number of things. When it was taken to Europe, people were a little bit skeptical of it for a while. And the first ones that were over in Italy were yellow, and they were called pomidoro, which is, I forget what pommy is, but doro is of gold. So your pomidoro today was based around because of some golden looking tomato. Yeah, and so in Europe for almost 200 years, it was just ornamental. This plant today, tomato, you need to use supports with, so you usually use some sort of thing that you can support the vine with. Sometimes that's just string, sometimes that's a stick. In the wild, tomatoes were perennial, which means that the plant will live for multiple years, but now it's cultivated as an annual, so after 1 year, the crop is chopped down. Apparently, the stem, bits of the stem, if you've ever got tomato on the vine, are hairy. And apparently, these can turn into roots when this is on the ground. And a note on propagating these is that you need seeds from mature fruits, and they need to be lightly fermented to remove the gelatinous outer coating, and then you dry them. The first GM food, so a little bit of recent history on the tomato. The first genetically modified food was a tomato, and it was called Flavor Saver. And it was designed to have a longer shelf life, but people weren't interested in it, especially because of when GM stuff was getting introduced, people were kind of pretty skeptical of it, and it is no longer available. An interesting thing that I found was that this is before GM, but the tomato has obviously been grown in different ways and to bring out different characteristics. And the tomatoes that you're used to seeing that are the main ones in the supermarket that don't really have that much taste are as they are because they were bred in order to become red all at the same time. And by doing that, that also somehow that gene switch flicked off the good flavor and the sweet part of it. So the reason that the main tomatoes that you get today are red is because the decision was made that it would be more valuable for them to be uniformly red than for them to have good flavor. But there is a growing popularity with tomatoes which are called heirloom tomatoes, which have a bit more flavor going on. Okay, on to our research. This week I want to look at a research paper that was more of an older paper that was just sort of made a big impact. So I want to throw that into the mix every once in a while, sort of important research papers. This research paper was called Global Consequences of Land Use by Foley et al. And this is in 2005. It was a Nature paper, or paper in the journal Nature. And it was a review paper. So what do you think when you think of, or when you hear, land use or land use change? You kind of have to think about it for a minute. You may or may not hear about people talking about land use a lot, but it's pretty straightforward. It is sort of what you expect, which is just how are we using the land and how are we changing the land. And this usually tends to mean either converting. When people are talking about land use change, they're either talking about converting pristine habitat into some sort of human use, so like cutting down a forest and turning into agriculture, or they're talking about something like turning agriculture into a suburb. So how are you using the land and how are you changing the land? And this is all something that we're pretty familiar with. So yeah, I gave some examples there. And why do these changes happen? They tend to happen to provide goods for people. These may be food, fiber, shelter. There's lots of different reasons that this happens. And what this paper explores is the scale of the impact of these changes. So we're used to seeing people protesting individual forests being cut down. We're used to there being pushback into seeing local scale changes, maybe seeing farmland changed into suburbs, things like that. But what is the impact when this happens at the global scale? And the big impact that this has is a bulk decrease in habitat for species. So when you're converting natural area into a agricultural area, you're decreasing the biodiversity, so the number of species that you have. Oh, I might be on a trail. Hopefully not. I thought I was pretty off track when I was here, but there is a slight bit of trail. I can move out of the way easily. Anyways, yeah, so what was I saying? Land use change has big scale impacts because that wetland that you've now converted into a housing development was serving a role for sequestering carbon and for filtering nutrients. And when you add these up, there's a huge number of issues that can come down the line, which you would expect. When you get rid of a wetland, you can expect to have less biodiversity as well as less capacity for that space to act as a natural sewer or sewer treatment plant, because wetlands often do that. But instead of focusing on all of the bad things that can happen when you convert land on the large scale, it's a bit more encouraging to look at the opportunities that can come from land use change, because land use change doesn't have to be a one-way street. It can be back in a direction. So you can restore land. It won't be the same as it was before, and it won't function as well as it did before, but it will provide a good deal of function. So I want to highlight a few examples that they pointed out in this paper of economic benefits, or benefits in general, that happen from either converting land back or stopping the conversion of land in general. So the first example was that New York City purchased development rights in watersheds of the Catskills Mountain, which provide water purification services. And they bought this land for $1 billion instead of building a filtration plant for $6 billion, plus annual operating costs of $300 million. So oftentimes the value of an ecosystem is not well valued, or that value is rushed through quickly. So there may have been logging interest in this forest or things like that, but you have to really take into all of the benefits that a functioning ecosystem can provide you, like in this case, water filtration. Another example is that reflective roofing, green space, so like parks, and increased shade reduce the effect of urban heat islands. So cities tend to get really hot because there's not a lot of vegetation. It's just asphalt, and the sun hits it and it just cooks. And this is really dangerous, especially for older folks and young people. There's also benefits associated with these sorts of greening changes in reducing smog and reduced electricity demands. And they estimated that they named a specific city in Sacramento, California. Well, Sacramento is the city. They could lower their energy costs by $26 million per year and reduce peak ozone concentrations, so emissions of bad stuff, by 6.5% if they green the area. They also pointed out in the last example that coffee farms which are within 1 kilometer of forest benefit from wild pollinators, which can increase their coffee yields by 20% and reduce the frequency of misshapen coffee beans by 27%. So this is all just to point out that there can be benefits going on when we really take a look at our ecosystems are providing to us on this large scale. And in many ways, the more you look at it on the large scale, the more you can justify preserving the small scale. So saving that little bit of forest, it could be a biodiversity hotspot, and that could be some rationale to save it. I saw that I have an image there, but I do not have reception here, so I cannot see it. But I will have put it up at some point. So if there was an image that was put up with no context, then that is what it is. And I think it was interesting. Anyways, that is that. And let's move on to the news now. A survey was done and it found that 3 in 5 Americans care as much about the environment as money. And 66% were willing to try anything to try and save the planet. So things like trying to be vegetarian or eat more veggies, things like that, which is encouraging to see. People want change to happen and are open to changes happening. And It's a matter of, I think it's easy to talk about things from a pessimistic perspective, but usually when you talk to people, I feel like even if there's a general sort of pessimism in different media and things like that, when you actually talk to individual people, there's a lot of optimism there. So, how do we scale that individual optimism into a collective optimism is, I think, the thing that we're sort of all working through right now. We've got this new thing called the internet, which is helping us to communicate in new ways. We've got new technology coming out all the time, and we're all just kind of, it's a lot to process. So take your time with things. My big thing, I so compulsively check the news, and that really, I can just feel that. I tried this past week not going on social media before the middle of the day, and that really felt like it had a lot of benefits just for my mindset. By the end of the day, I didn't feel burnt out in the same way. So experiment with ways to chill things out a little bit. And if you're watching, a little bit about the place where I'm at right now, I'm in a place called Queen Elizabeth Park on the Kapiti Coast. And if the camera hasn't been changed by the wind too much, we have Kapiti Island behind me, which is a very cool little island. Little side note there. Okay, some more news. Good news from Texas for ecology. Texas lists 2 critical pollinator flowers as endangered species. And this is going to practically guarantee milkweed recovery and recovery of bracted twist flower. And milkweed is crucial for butterflies, and bracted twist flower is very important for bees. And when species have been placed on these lists, their declines have been stopped at a rate of 99%. So that's good news to hear. And Texas is a massive area and is really important for migrating monarch butterflies. And I feel like everyone can get behind monarch butterflies being cool. And I want to live in a world where monarch butterflies are important, but if we need to make a rationale for why logically should we keep them, my guess is that because there are millions of monarch butterflies that are usually migrating each year, if not hundreds of thousands. And so these will be food source for birds and probably for some lizards, maybe for other insects. They're probably eating insects along the way. Oh no, I don't know what they're eating. But whenever you see big natural migrations of any sort of animal or insect, it means that you can think about those as little packages of energy and nutrients that are being transported from one area to another. And those transfers of nutrients tend to keep those nutrients and that energy in the ground. I feel like nature's oftentimes, well, there's going to be exceptions to that, but nature tends to like to make the most of the energy that it can get. And so we can think about that as being important for that reason. We've got a recycling plant for batteries is open in the US, and it can recycle 70,000 electric vehicle worth of batteries per year. That's a lot of vehicles. being processed. I don't know. I'm not sure how many cars there are, but that's quite a lot for just one recycling plant. Some more news. Elephants are important ecosystem engineers. A study has been showing because they distribute seed and they trample small plants so that big ones can get bigger. So when you have a lot of small plants around, they may sort of sap the water or nutrients out of an area from a big tree. But if you have less of those, then bigger trees can get bigger. And the study, which I found in a news area, so I'm not sure the authors of the study, they said they can increase rainforest carbon capture by 9,500 metric tons of carbon dioxide. It's basically a lot of carbon dioxide. They eat the leaves of fast-growing trees and the fruit of slow-growing trees. So that means that they're eating the fruit of slow-growing trees. They're eating that fruit, they're moving around, and they're distributing the seeds. You can start to feel a little sprinkle. So I'm going to groove through this. And the study said carbon storage would decline 6 to 9% if elephants disappeared from forests, which is massive, a massive impact for just one animal. And that's when you think about why is biodiversity important. Biodiversity is important because lots of species are doing lots of things. Kinda, yeah. And our last piece of news is that cheetahs are/have been getting reintroduced to India. There's less than 7,000 cheetahs around the world in the wild. And this is a lot due to grassland habitat being converted into farmland. And in 1952, they died out in India. And the Asiatic cheetah only is now in Iran, but it is critically endangered there. India's been trying to get cheetahs back there for a long time. People have been interested in trying to do this. And they have just sort of got into a political space where they're able to do that. And they're bringing in 100 from South Africa over the next decade. And this is in Kuno National Park. So if you're in India, check out Kuno National Park if you want to see some cool cheetahs. And they used these African cheetahs and not Asiatic cheetahs because the Asiatic populations are so low. They thought the risk would be too big in transporting them that they might lose some along the way. So as much as I'm sure they would have wanted to, that transportation process can be pretty dangerous. Anyways, that is it for this week. And I think it might be starting to rain. So we will catch you all next time. Hopefully the recording worked. And yeah, see ya. Bye.